Hello, Africa and the world. Thank you immensely for joining us on Fresh Dose of Talking Point via your number one Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. A few years ago, a statement from the Economic Commission for Africa, ECA, accentuated the need for a single currency on the African continent as it could ease the intra-trade which could be beneficial to Africa. In the face of the recurring global economic shocks that impedes Africa's prospects of reaching its target of achieving economic independence, the continent will have to build its resilience to withstand the shocks, and this is possible with the establishment of a common market and a single currency. With the vision and prospects, experts have pinpointed that if the dream of a single currency and therefore a common market comes true, it stands a chance of deepening Africa's trade integration as a common currency can improve the continent's economic position globally. How feasible is it for Africa to establish an independent economic body and a unified currency? Join us in the course of today's edition of Talking Points as we discuss this with our experts. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Points. Stay with us. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in, this is Talking Point over your number one Pan-African channel for you, Media Africa. But today we're looking at the economic sphere of the African continent, where we're asking the question, how would a common market and a common currency foster Africa's development? Of course, that is the menu for today. And to evoke these, first and foremost, we shall be taking you to the U.S. to join Dr. Stanley FONGOD, who is a Pan-Africanist and a techpreneur. Greetings to you, sir. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me, and welcome to our televiewers as well. And I hope that today we'll have a fruitful discussion as always.
Subsequently, we shall be equally joined by Mr. Engineer ELVIS, who is the National Communications Secretary for the Popular Actions Party, and he doubles as a political analyst. Ladies and gentlemen, we would not take much of your time. We dive directly into analysis with our guest, who is already with us here this afternoon. Like we mentioned in our preamble, we're discussing how a simple or single currency and a common market is going to foster Africa's development. Now, first, I would like to champion or channel this first question to you, Dr. FONGOD. Now, in your opinion, what is your evaluation of the current economic crisis of the African continent?
I think that what we're experiencing on the market in Africa is actually in many ways, and it has come as a result of the will of the people, especially those in leadership, not willing to be able to fight this head on. We cannot be living on the continent where we are segregated by international boundaries, that of which none of those is our making, and then have policies, which is quite draconian in nature, that has limited Africa from basically expanding and, even onto the world stage, talk less of Africa nations being able to integrate and have a free market with one another. The limitations that we experience comes as a result of the fact that goods and services, cannot easily, go across borders that are on the African continent. As a result of that, we are experiencing dire economic crisis. There is this whole entire issue about value chain. We cannot be able to experience regional value chains on the continent because goods and services that are, quite heavy or dominant in certain parts of the continent are not readily available in other parts of the continent, and actually they do need it. So we are in a situation where we really need to be able to create a free, trade zone on the continent of Africa, and obviously have a single currency that will facilitate, the transactions, and also limit all these fees that we pay, across the board for transactions of goods and services.
Okay, thank you for that brilliant preamble, brilliant introduction. I will just acknowledge the presence of Mr. Engineer ELVIS BANEH. You're welcome on board, sir.
Good afternoon, Sharon. Good afternoon, Doctor, and good afternoon to all viewers. it's rather unfortunate that back here in the capital city, Yaoundé, we are short of energy. There's no light, so the image quality may not be quite the best.
Thank you, Mansley admits the hurdles for taking part in today's edition of Talking Point. Like I was asking your co-panelists, I was asking about his evaluation of the current economic situation in Africa. Now, with relation to that, or with regards to that, what is your opinion?
Can you come again, please?
So I was asking what your opinion is with regards to the current economic situation facing the African continent.
Well, I think we answered this question a few days back, if I'm not mistaken. Talking about the current economic situation in Africa, I think it's not at its best. Yes, it's not at its best. That's just the least I can say. It is not at its best, though we could be far, far beyond where we are today. But unfortunately, I think sometimes we have leaders on the continent, people who sometimes come to power through doubtful means, thereby not having any social projects for their respective countries, people without any vision, people without any roadmap of theirs that they have to follow to be able to execute any project of any kind, people who sometimes appoint officials into offices not because they deserve or merit to be there, but because they are friends, they were classmates, they were schoolmates. And so at the end of the day, across Africa, you have people who are on leadership, but who really do not have anything to do when it comes to the skills and the mastery of what leadership is all about. People who are in leadership, they think of themselves only rather than the people and the nations that they are called to lead. So economically, it's but normal that we should find ourselves in the mess where we are because those who are supposed to galvanize and push forth that we emerge as a continent, they have been, in fact, they have failed woefully in their respective responsibilities. Take note that we have countries where sometimes maybe you find at the helm of a business institution, you find at the level of the Ministry of maybe Economy and Finance, for instance, somebody who did, I don't know, who read his history in schools, for instance. So when you take someone who read history, for instance, and you keep him to manage a business institution or to run the Ministry of Economy and Finance, you understand that economically we can really not progress because we expect that technicians, people who have a mastery of particular areas and domains, should be appointed into offices where they actually do fit, so that even if you have your technical advisors, when they are advising you, they are advising on what you already at least have good knowledge about, but not that like in the case of Cameroon, they tell you that no, anybody can handle any ministry because it is administration, provided he is surrounded by technicians of that field. So when technicians come at the end of the day and they give you the wrong ideas, advise you in the wrong direction, how do you know that you are taking the wrong direction? That is the problem. So the economy in Africa is not the best simply because we do not have the right persons at the helm of leadership.
Thank you, Mansi, Mr. Engineer Elvis. Now, to proceed with you, Dr. Stanley, now amidst the issues plaguing Africa, like the conflict, we have this conflict of Western power interests, challenges like mismanagement of national economies, economic loopholes on the African continent. Amidst all this, what are some of the manifold advantages of a common currency and market to bring to the Africans' economic landscape?
Excuse me, sorry. I think that trade expansion will be, I think, will be heavily enhanced, on the continent if we basically just have a single currency. And what that basically means is that it will help us take away tariffs, excuse me, so that we will not be in the situation where one particular country is trying to be able to ship something to another country, and then we are basically haggling over what the tariffs will be and all of that. So you have a country like Nigeria trying to ship to Cameroon, trying to ship to Ivory Coast, those particular countries, because we basically have a unified front so far as our currency is concerned, those goods will be tariff-free. And what will happen eventually, that if you look across the board on the continent of Africa, if that was going to be the case, I think we can look at the country, the European bloc, the EU bloc, and realize that whenever they set up, since the whole entire EU zone was created, the GDP of individual nations have literally gone up, all right? And that's a case study that we can look at. Unfortunately, on the African continent, we don't have that yet, but it is my idea that if we were going to basically have a single currency and then actually have the capacity for us across the continent to be able to basically have a free market, the GDP of individual nations on the African continent will also rise. That's my take on that.
Thank you immensely. Now to proceed, Mr. NJINE, how can the continent reach in so much in terms of natural resources, foster sustainable policies, and of course safeguard its strategic resources?
The lines are not quite clear here, madam. Can you just repeat your question again, please?
So I was asking, at the point where Africa finds itself, we used to say that Africa is endowed with a lot of resources, but sometimes the policies involved or the policies put in place are not favorable for the continent's development. So with regards to that, how can Africa foster for sustainable policies that will go a long way in enhancing development?
When we talk about policies or complain about policies that are not the best, the question is, who are those, or who is that person who even first of all sets in place the policies that we are following? There is a problem. We have all the natural resources, we have all the human resources, but the policies that apply or that are applied on the African continent are policies not set for Africa by the Africans. These are policies that are inherited. These are policies that are imported from the Western world, and of course these policies are set to benefit excuse me, to benefit the Westerners and not necessarily the Africans. That is why you see, for instance, on the issue of the BRICS, I am one of those who said I personally do not see it as a way forward outlook for Africa, because Africans are eventually only going to join into something excuse me, please, that some people start somewhere and thought of it for their own interest, and Africans are coming to adhere into it. But if Africans can sit up as a people and they study their own market, they find out where they have their difficulties, they find out where they have their strongholds, and then they decide, okay, this is what we think we need to do for ourselves as a people, then certainly you realize that we will begin to have policies that can work out well for us as a people, because certainly no one will want to take the wrong decisions in his right thinking mind for himself. You see, but when we are talking about policies which generally are not our policies, I think a few days back we were discussing and talking about the World Bank and the IMF. These are institutions that are teleguided by the Western countries, and so when they are coming towards Africa, those who are pulling the strings at the background have set forth certain policies that can certainly not benefit Africa. They will keep maintaining us in that position of servitude, where at the end of the day they keep giving us the impression that they are coming to give us aid, when in reality we are the ones catapulting them to where they are. We talk sometimes about the European Union. I often like to remind that when you find any country coming from within the European Union bloc coming to do business in Africa, they may come as a country, but in reality they cannot go out of the principles that have been set forth by the European Union guiding trade within that community. In other words, any individual country from that bloc that comes to negotiate business with any country in Africa, at the end of the day, the business negotiated does not only benefit that country as an independent entity, but it benefits the entire European Union. So that is what Africans are supposed to do. We should have our own bloc, or have our own blocks, where we set forth our own policies. And so when the Western world is coming in to do business, they are coming in to fit into our own shoes, and not they coming in to dictate on us how it should be, when in reality at the end of the day they are the same persons who are coming to benefit entirely from our resources, both human and natural. So I think to foster our policies, to be able to ensure that Africa emerges from where we are, we should think as Africans and form a solid bloc when it comes to economic affairs in our continent, and we work from that premise. Even if a country is going out to negotiate business, the business in the long run does not just benefit that country, but it benefits the entire African continent.
Exactly, it goes a long way to benefiting the entire African continent. And now over to you, Dr. Stanley. You listen to your co-panelists. in the long run, how can the political atmosphere on the continent actually affect these economic trajectory we're talking about in terms of Africa's economic growth and development?
For African growth, and development and the integration that we are looking for on the African continent, I think that we really need to be able to focus a little bit more on as to exactly the benefits that we gain, as a result of this regional integration. And the reason for that is because, we really have to, 95% of the wars that we're having on the African continent and everywhere else in the world is the fight for resources. And unfortunately, we live in the continent where the resources that we have, we are not even managing the resources, and the transformative power of that we have so far as those resources are concerned is absolutely not even there. If you look, there's a particular company in America which is called Hershey. It's in a place called Pennsylvania, in the state of Pennsylvania. It's called Hershey chocolate. It's called the chocolate capital of the world. I've been in Hershey myself. So Hershey has a population about 14,000 people. All right, that's it. 14,000 people in this little square mile, okay, of a place, in the middle of nowhere in the city of Pennsylvania, just outside of a place called Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's the chocolate capital of the world. All right. The GDP for Hershey, or the GDP for the chocolate factory, for Hershey, the chocolate factory, is 11.3 billion US dollars. They have a market that is 50 states within the United States of America, all right, and because these states consider these states to be nations on the African continent, and because of the free transportation of goods and services across the board, nobody gets to worry about anything called tariffs. There are taxes in individual states, but that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't affect the overall dispensing of goods and services across the continent. Or the country, basically a continent of America. So here is the thing. If we are supposed to imagine that a country like Ivory Coast, largest producer of cocoa in the world, all right? Ivory Coast is the largest producer of cocoa in the world. In 2022, Ivory Coast sold close to about 3.3 billion US dollars of cocoa beans to the world. And a huge percentage of that cocoa beans was Hershey, the chocolate factory. The power of transformation, that we can actually be able to have a whole entire nation, I don't know how many people are in Ivory Coast, maybe about 25, 26 million people, okay, in the whole entire nation of Ivory Coast, but there are 14,000 people located in the middle of nowhere that has the capacity to outdo a whole entire nation based upon its economic outlook. And this is as a result of the transformative power that if we can just convert our cocoa beans into chocolate, we have the capacity to be able to do this on the African continent and export, if not finished goods, but at least semi-finished goods. And this will come when there is an open market. The problem we have so far as we start talking about the issues about stability on the continent, yes, we have greater problems so far as stability is concerned, and this is as a result of poverty. Wherever poverty persists, there's going to be war. Wherever poverty persists, there's going to be civil war. Whenever poverty persists, if you're talking about the issues of, what's happening in the Sahel, where military men basically rises up and take over a particular community, take over a nation, it is as a result of poverty. And the only way we can actually manage this is, like my brother said, is to have people in power who understand what is it that they're doing. You don't want to become a president because it's a bucket list experience for you. You don't want to become a president because you want to die and let it be said about you that you became a president. You want to be a president because you have the capacity, the ability to lead a nation and to be able to create a future, not just for yourself, but a future for those who you're leading. You want to become a president because you have the fortitude, you have the mind, you have the capacity to be able to take us from where we are to where we're supposed to be. That is the calling, that is the vision. It's not just anybody can do anything and then everybody runs. That's the African problem.
Exactly. Like you mentioned, Africa indeed has a vast market, a population of almost 1.5 billion people. Now, stay with you, Mr. or Dr. Stanley Fongod. Now, in your opinion, with all this vast market, it was saying that Africa holds a great promise for the future. How can the continent capitalize these potentials to effectively facilitate trade and economic integration, which you mentioned in your rather say in your answer?
It is important for us to understand that as large as the continent is, okay, and as populous as we are on the African continent, that basically means the market too is large. So if we basically become a bloc, we will become a destination for the world, especially when it comes to goods and services. So we'll have a lot of companies around the world that will be exporting their goods into Africa, and that also means that we'll have the capacity to start exporting our own goods also out of Africa, you know, to the rest of the world. And the reason for that is because we basically will be helping individual companies on the African continent actually basically convert their raw materials into somewhat semi-goods and finished goods, you know, so that the value of the margin, okay, the profit margin will basically go up rather than us just shipping raw materials out to the rest of the world. When this happens, you realize that unemployment is basically going to drop. Okay, the rate of unemployment is going to drop because the job market on the continent will absolutely increase. We'll have a lot more positions for people to fill than we even have people to fill them. That's the reality. The standard of living is basically going to go up. And the kicker for this is that foreign direct investments, those who have the capacity, who have the money, who are outside of the continent, looking at the prosperous nature of the continent, looking at the free trade that we have across the continent, you know, will basically come into the continent and say, we want to do business with you. Think about this way. It's so difficult for you to start anything on the African continent, especially when it comes to the nature of one getting licensing. For example, if you want to start up a telecommunication company, you have to deal with the almost impossible thing that is called Cameroon. If you want to basically expand that, let's say you successfully have your telecommunications company in Cameroon, and then you want to do that in Nigeria, you need to also go into Nigeria and then start looking for the licensing for Nigeria, and think about 54 countries on the African continent. If there's some kind of a standardization where we basically have a one-size-fits-all in terms of our licensing, then that basically encourage a lot of investors to come into the African continent, knowing very well that once they get into the particular country, they are in Africa. You cannot say you are in Africa if you have not been to Nigeria. All right, because Nigeria is the largest market. So you cannot also say that you're in Africa if you have not been, if you are not in South Africa. You can't say you are in Africa if you are only located in one country on the African continent. To say you are in Africa, you need to be in Africa. That means you need to occupy a lot of the larger markets and then allow the larger markets to be able to push you into sub-markets. That is the reality of where we are if we're able to just put things together. A regional integration, a larger market will only permit us to be able to have, you know, lower unemployment, have most of our companies become, for the first time, becomes absolutely profitable, and then those companies can now be able to start selling shares, and then the stock market in our individual nations will basically flourish. Then we can be able to do business, you know, on the global scale.
Okay, now I'll take this next question to you, Mr. Engineer. You listen to what your co-panelists had to say, but then what's your reaction to his contribution, given that the African continent is actually having a lot of potentials, but then in the face of these global changes, what chance does Africa have in the face of these global challenges to be able to stand and, of course, become the future of the world, which we're talking about?
Well, already the first thing I will commend is the fact that my brother, Dr. Stanley, he said so many wonderful things. And in fact, I'm afraid I maybe have to say he has said almost just everything. You see, he made a statement which I captured, having leaders who are supposed to take us from where we are to where we are supposed to be. And so when you are asking me, for instance, what Africa is supposed to do faced with the global challenges, the first thing I will tell you is that it comes back to the issue of leadership. If we are supposed to be somewhere and we are not there, then we begin to question our leadership. Why are we not there? Because we have people, like I earlier mentioned, who lack the vision, who lack the foresight, people who come to power without any social project of theirs. You see, so talking about the global challenges that we actually face, I think it goes back to just the fact that what we as a people on the African continent, we are not on the deciding table. We are never on that deciding table that decides on what global international business or economic global economy how it should run. We are highly on that table, and sometimes when we are even invited, we are invited and we go as listeners. We are invited and we sit just at the receiving end. We are invited when everything has been decided, and we simply need to cram it down our throats, and then we come to think of it. Why do you think you always hear of France Afrique? France as a nation sits and invites an entire continent to her country to give our so-called heads of state instructions. Russia sits and invites an entire continent. Heads of states leave Africa, an entire continent, to visit Russia and individually. Why do you think you talk about Sino-Africa, whatever thing? The Chinese, they sit, they invite the entire African continent. This is because these guys have understood the nature of leaders we have. They are a people without any portfolio. You see, people without any ideas of theirs. So at the end of the day, when China, when France, when Germany, when Russia, they are inviting our heads of state, they have already sat and planified out everything. They have already decided on everything, and so they are only inviting you to tell you exactly what they want to do, and then you begin to see our heads of state running and scrambling to ratifying things that they did not even have time to read, ratifying things that they read and even did not understand, because those who even went or who go to represent us as people are, like we earlier mentioned, are people who sometimes don't even fit in the right shoes. You tell someone like I earlier mentioned who did history and is going to represent us in an international gathering where they are discussing economy. What do you actually think that individual can propose or understand exactly when he meets technicians of that domain from other countries? So the challenges we are facing, I want to think the greatest cry comes back to us Africans. We should be serious enough. We should gain our own consciousness, and if we have that zeal to want to grow, we should learn to appoint the right persons to occupy the right offices, and then we give them that free hand to be able to bring in their own ideas. When I talk about giving them a free hand here, what do I mean? Sometimes, again, we realize that offices sometimes in our country are all political offices, where at the end of the day, you may even be someone qualified to handle an office, but because the person who appointed you there has his own personal ideology that does not tie with your professional know-how, he is the one that dictates on you what you should do. That is why if you come again to our own country here, Cameroon, you always hear ministers act on what they call high instructions from the head of state. So at the end of the day, it's like you are appointed a minister, but you are not supposed to do anything. You are not supposed to think. You are not supposed to bring in any innovations. You just sit and you wait until you receive some high instructions coming from the he who appointed you. That is when you act. You only act upon his own instructions and not your own initiatives. Whereas if you have leaders who are qualified, who are in the right offices, and you allow them, you give them that free hand to think, they can actually come up with innovative ideas and be able to think the right way and propose the right solutions to our numerous problems. So I think we face with the global challenges, it is all about Africans having to sit down, think, face with these global challenges, and remember that when we talk about global challenges, we end up always being the victims, because at the end of the day, like I say, Africa is the one feeding the rest of the world. So under normal circumstances, the world should come to us to get what we want and the function with respect to what we offer, not us who are feeding the world, going towards the world to hear what they want and we act with respect to what they want. It doesn't go that way.
Exactly.
Or it shouldn't go that way.
Yeah, it's all about putting Africa at the point where it can be able to decide for itself. Now, staying with you, Mr. NJINE, now you mentioned something very interesting, but then I would like to capitalize on that. Now, on Africa sitting on a deciding table, with that in mind, could a single currency elevate Africa's chances of actually having a solid economic position globally?
Well, I think that truly if we were to have that deciding voice, that deciding power, and we have a single currency of ours, it is going to go a long way into relieving Africa as a whole of the challenges that we actually do face. Because first, remember there's also this issue of stability. With a single currency, I think we are going to have not just the different regions being stable financially, but I think the entire African continent will be stable when it comes to doing business. Before I joined the program, I got the doctor already, I think, discussing about that. When you have to move goods from one country to the other and the currency, the exchange rates, they keep fluctuating, it is a serious problem. You see, but if we have a common currency, you will realize that no matter from what part of Africa you are transporting your goods to, you have no worries, you have no fears, because there is nothing of exchange rates. So there is no area, no point in time where you either need to be losing money because the exchange rates maybe are something either high or low, and so do not either favor or favor some particular persons. That's the first thing. Secondly, if we were to have a common currency, I think it will not only alongside the free trade zone, if you were to implement the two, make our African continent a much more attractive market, because you know one thing about business is about having the market. You see, and if we have a global market, like you earlier mentioned, close to 1.5 billion people acting with a single currency, and of course on our African continent, we have all what it takes to stake our own currency. We have the gold and all the other minerals. I think the rest of the world will be rushing to us, and we will be the ones dictating the exchange rate with respect to our own currency. Unfortunately, today it is not the case. We have the material, but then they take the material from us and they use it to step up their currencies, and we are the ones acting at the deficit. So I think that with the single currency, Africa will take leaps forward in terms of development. I think with a single currency, it will also alleviate the issues of unemployment on the continent, because like Doctor was rightly mentioning, once you have a business where you can easily expand to other parts of the world, automatically you will not take Cameroonians because you are a Cameroonian to go run a business of yours in another part of Africa. You will have to employ nationals in that country, and when you are employing them, of course, you are fighting against unemployment already in that country. Secondly, when you create a company in that country, automatically there will be other companies or other small businesses that will automatically open around that area, because it becomes an entire chain. You see, and now with that single currency too, you understand that people can easily monitor the market. There will be some sort of competition in the market in terms of prices, and so life becomes even cheaper too for the Africans, because you will hardly not have to extort people in one part of Africa following the same currency. But when the exchange rates are different, some people can sometimes maybe inflate their prices and at the detriment of the common man. Whereas if we had a common currency, there will be at least some sort of regulations or moderations put in place to ensure that if a commodity is already sold in this country at this price, no matter what part of Africa it finds itself, it will certainly not go beyond a certain rate.
Exactly, it wouldn't go. Now, with you, Dr. Stanley, now, could you ascertain that with the presence of borders across the African continent, with the reeling political crisis which Africa and some countries are witnessing at the time, are these factors hampering or hindering this aspiration for common markets across the African continent? And how could these affect Africa's development?
I think that is the reason why we do not have, a common market. It's the reason why the market is not integrated. The international boundaries has become most of our own greatest demise when it comes to us advancing economically, and when basically it comes to us also being able to have a robust economic systems that literally caters for the good of the African. It doesn't matter how much we try to do in our individual nations, but we need to be able to expand. We need to be able to have our goods and services leave the boundaries, of the confines that we have been placed in the name of international boundaries. territories, and then allow us to be able to flourish outside of those communities, and then go to the broader African market where our goods and services can be appreciated by all, and then, you know, the markets then decide exactly which particular good and services that they basically would like to pay for. We need to be able to allow that environment where individuals can actually test the market and allow their products, you know, to flourish in other territories, you know, East Africa, and let us be able to allow that to happen. I think that, you know, you did ask a question on the issues of us having a single currency, and I think in reality, you know, we really should be able to have a single currency. If we're going to talk about financial inclusion, well, we have almost everybody else basically participating in the financial market. We need to be able to integrate this sector, and the only way for us to integrate this sector is to have a single currency. If we were going to have a single currency, it's absolutely going to help the continent tremendously, and basically take us from depending, you know, on the petrodollar, from depending on other currencies that we have absolutely no control over. We don't know nothing about those currencies, and the biggest problem is that those currencies can absolutely be manipulated at our own detriment. All right, excuse me. If a country decides that they're going to basically devalue their currency, there's nothing you can do about it. If the country decides that they're going to do something to the currency that will benefit their own economy but will be at a detriment to your own economy, there's nothing you can do about it. But if we absolutely had a single currency on the African continent, we can decide exactly what we want to do, and it will basically be for the benefit of the African, and we can actually be able to control that to help our own economy rather than depending on something from the outside. Even if our currency is only good within the continent, that will be fine with us, because eventually it will be respected around the world.
Thank you immensely, Dr. FONGOD. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is Talking Point over your #1 Pan-African channel for you, Media Africa, where we're discussing how feasible is it for a common single currency and a common market on the African continent, and what impact it would have on the African continent's development trajectory. Now, continue with you, Mr. NJINE. According to a member of the African Business Club, Alex Ezonowo, he says, and I quote, the inability to locally develop technologies or boost production in Africa, defend the local market and external trade fully depends on foreign currencies, means that Africa imports inflation of a massive scale while exporting deflation and giving away priceless resources meant for its own economic development. Now, this is in line with what Dr. FONGOD said in his own contribution about the rise and a drop in prices across Africa. Now, could you quickly react on these point of view? Mr. Engineer Elvis, are you with us?
Yes. I was saying that is something we have often decried generally as Pan-Africanists. The fact that when we talk about import exportation, we are basically, let me begin by saying, we are basically an agricultural economy, but unfortunately this sector has not been developed. Because even, bet you me, madam, even when you go to some of those countries, they call the Sahel countries, where they will claim that the soils are arid. No, there are particular things that grow in those areas. But unfortunately, like I said, we keep accusing our leadership because they do not give room for the nationals to be able to exploit, discover, and invest in that area to be able to boost our economy, because Africa is capable of feeding herself and feeding the entire continent in terms of just agricultural produce. Here, I am not talking about raw material again. I'm not talking about natural resources. I mean, in terms of agricultural produce, we are capable of feeding ourselves and feeding the entire world. Sometimes when I hear they talk about aid to Africa and they talk about importation of rice and other things, I laugh, because if you come to our own country here, it is possible that we produce more than enough rice that can feed ourselves, and then we are able to export some. Even if we will not have to export out of Africa, but we export to other African countries, you see. But unfortunately, when you ask a question related to technological know-how and agriculture, it's unfortunate. When we talk about technology, come to think of it, we have people, permit me to constantly always like to limit myself to my own country, Cameroon. We have people who are leading this country who are above 80 years of age, people who cannot work, and who certainly have nothing to do with technology. How do you even imagine for once that such people can sit up and think as to how to develop the technological know-how in the country? That is the problem. There are some domains, there are some areas where you must learn to leave them in the hands of youthful leadership, people who understand the dynamics of the present global challenges, people who have an idea as to how things do function presently in other parts of the world, and people who can easily be able to copy and bring into the country. And then the second thing, like I said, politically, we should hands off in certain areas. Let people have that free will, because sometimes even in our continent, what kills us is that even when you come as an individual and you have an initiative of yours and you want to implement it, politicians start looking at you as a potential rival who may do something, become popular, and eventually grab their position. That is how they look at it in Africa and in my country here. And so at the end of the day, even personal initiatives rather are killed at the end of the day. And that is why Doctor was mentioning something about people who may want to leave other parts of the world to come back. We have so many Africans who may want to come back, but the present policies put in place by the present leadership do not permit them to come back because they will not give you room to be able to excel. So I think I could rather simply give it as an advice. Our leaders should learn to give room to the young who have another way, another view of what leadership is supposed to look like, you see, and they give them that liberty, that free hand to be able to come up with their own initiatives and implement them. In the domain of agriculture, there are many of them. I come from the northwest region of Cameroon, for instance. I have school, particularly in Santa. Believe you me there, madam, that is an area where almost all the youth there, they know what gardening is all about. But it is something they learned, it is transmitted to them from their own parents. It is not like they actually did learning from school officially. But the question is, for over 63 years that we have been living together as one nation, what has the regime in place, what has this government ever done, for instance, to be able to encourage this youthful population in that part of the country to be able to increase their productivity so that we can have enough for ourselves, and even go as far as maybe transforming, let me say the tomatoes, we can transform them into canned tomatoes, and then we preserve, we consume, and we export. But that has never happened for the past 63 years. So you can imagine, therefore, that we have the potentials, but like I say, everything boils back to the leadership in the country.
Exactly, it gets back to the leadership, because leaders are at the helm of affairs in every nation. Now let's look at something, integration on the African continent, and of course this economic growth we discussed in the course of this edition. Dr. Fongod, we should equally talk of the implementation of the African continent of free trade area, and we saw in line with that the introduction of the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPAS, which states that provides Africa with a greater capability to conduct cross-border transactions, as well as expand the scale of both active and latent opportunities to enhance inter-trade. Now, trade between two countries like Cameroon, for instance, and Nigeria. With that in mind, how urgent is it for Africa to establish an independent Africa Central Bank, or better still, a reserve? And how would that strengthen the work in progress already of the African Continental Free Trade Area?
I think that is going to, I mean, by the way, that's good news. It's something that I think that most on the African continent that is involved in the production of goods and services have been waiting for. And the reason for that also is because, genuinely speaking, for us to be able to start talking about how effective the market will be, we need to be able to understand that we have to allow the market decides, what goods and services the market wants. We cannot force the market to do what we want the market to do. The market is the one that basically tells us if they like something or they don't like anything, and that's the way it is. So to be able to have a form of payment, where we can actually settle, our financial transactions on the continent, where we absolutely can do so without, basically going in from one central bank to another, that will really, really be good. And secondly, I think that this can become a whole lot more efficient also, if we basically just, become one single currency, and then it will basically becomes like something like what we have in Cameroon, in Nigeria, I think in Ghana, which is called mobile money. I think that if you look at the mobile money platform, what that does is, even though I don't think it's cross-border right now, I don't know, but I'm thinking that what that will achieve, especially by allowing, and that's just another form of, settlements of payments, what that will do in the long run is that it will allow, for a broader market to be able to see goods and services that is being produced in other parts of the continent. And as a result of that, it will actually improve efficiency, productivity of the goods that are already in production. For those who are already producing, they will find better ways of doing it. They will see, more efficient, more effective ways of doing it. And then the market will be able to say yay to this and nay to that. That is what will bring us to a place where we basically start producing goods and services that the world will probably have need for. But as long as we are limited within our own geographical location and our individual nations, we will not be able to have that competition that is needed to be able to become competitive in the marketplace, so the market can decide exactly whose product they want and whose services they are looking for. I think in the area of services, for example, in countries like Nigeria, they have done tremendous, work in that sector. In Ghana, they have done tremendous work in that sector. You come to places like Cameroon, you go to places like Congo, those are still in the dark ages or something. We basically need to do more. But as much as we begin to have, folks from Nigeria shows up in Cameroon, and those from Ghana basically comes over to Cameroon, you soon realize that those who are lacking in that sector in Cameroon will start, having some kind of an efficiency. They'll start gaining knowledge. There will be a whole lot of knowledge transfer, and as a result of that, the overall trajectory of the entire continent will be that there will be a positive gain in efficiency, a positive gain in the productivity, and that's where I think that we need to go.
Exactly. If Ms. Engineer is still with us, let's crown up today's debate, or today's topic of discussion. Now, with these achievements already in mind, where do you see the future of Africa's economy and the level of development? So unfortunately, we are unable to connect with Mr. Njina. I'll channel this question over to you, Dr. Stanley, in a bit to close up or conclude today's topic of discussion. Where do you see Africa's future in terms of its economic growth and a level of development?
I think that I see a robust African economy that is stable. I see that I see a continent with policies that are well coordinated. I think that our macroeconomic situations on the continent will change. I'm thinking that there will be a reduction in economic crisis, and I'm hoping that with the changes and with this Pan-African flair, where a lot of folks are now beginning to say, you know what, we absolutely want an Africa that we want. This is the Africa we are looking for. And I've forgotten who said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. So we are not just predicting the future, we are creating the future, and we can create the future with robust economic policies that are enshrined in our Pan-African tendencies, that are enshrined in us being Africa, that we can be able to build this whole entire economy with Africa in mind, have this desire to be able to see a continent that will become a beacon of hope, a city on the hill, a shining light that stands as the tower on this tumultuous sea, which is the world, where boats that are riding in waves that are unknown can be able to see that lighthouse and basically paddle themselves on shore where they can have safety. Let Africa become a destination for the world in its purity, in its glory, in its all forms of greatness. We are the center of the globe, and frankly speaking, we are not just the center of the world, we are the center of all with everything. Life began here, and I think that we can absolutely be able to show the world how great Africa is by our economic outlook. That is possible. That I believe.
Actually, Africa is at the point where it, of course, secures the future. Thank you immensely, Dr. Stanley FONGOD, for your contribution on today's edition of Talking Point.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me. I appreciate you.
Africa as the future equally acknowledge the presence of Mr. Engineer ELVIS BANEH for his brilliant contribution on today's edition of the show. Unfortunately, he couldn't stay till the end. Ladies and gentlemen, we say thank you for taking our time to join us on today's edition of Talking Point over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. Thank you for listening over the Pan-African Radio FM 96.3. We say take the rendezvous for another time and do stay in company of our programs. What?
On Zoom president now, it's not proper when it's just filet.
Oh, it's filet.
It's only one except that I have.
Wait. Told them.
I see that they're shouting there.
Let me see.
That they cannot rebroadcast it.
They can rebroadcast because
I mean, they cannot.
Because it was just on Monday. It's still. That's what they're doing with Clary's own. Let's go up and see. Let me see if they can do. He knows news online. Let me see what is there first. Then we'll see if it's possible. Because if they have enough elements, there's no need
to do it. But should I just put my elements in the flash?
Yes.